Francis, we're all off to the 80s, so join us there next week. My name's Nick Hancock. They think it's all over. It is now.
Southampton against Spurs, the FA Cup third round. What do you reckon? A draw? Well, either way, it's live on BBC One tomorrow at 5:35. On the way tonight, Lenny Henry on tour after the news.
London was misty, with a golden sun-pierced mist in which buildings hung as insubstantial soaring presences. The beautiful, dear city.
We don't just do books. Comedy, drama and books on the radio. BBC 7, a new digital radio station.
This is BBC One in the South. Now the 10 o'clock news with Peter Sissons and Geraldine Peers.
George Bush rallies American forces for the crucial hours that may lie ahead. He tells thousands of troops to be prepared to liberate Iraq. 2 dead, 2 wounded. Police hunt a killer with a submachine gun. Injury, shock and dismay, an axe attack on an historic abbey. And the Germans can call it a Rolls-Royce, but will we accept it as one?
Here, the crisis at Britain's newest hospital. Just weeks after it opened, the Great Western is too full to take any more patients. And the battle to keep the floodwaters at bay during another disastrous day.
Good evening. George Bush set the tone for the new year today, telling the American military to be ready to fight in Iraq. The President and Commander-in-Chief told thousands of troops at America's biggest army base in Texas that America would prefer Saddam Hussein to disarm voluntarily. But if Saddam sealed his own fate by refusing, then American troops would be Iraq's liberators. As the President spoke, thousands more Marines were given orders to deploy from California to the Gulf.
Just for the occasion, the Commander-in-Chief came to deliver his New Year's resolution to the troops and to the nation. Be prepared for war with Iraq.
Thank you all.
His venue, Fort Hood in Texas, the biggest army base in the US and proud of its nickname, America's Hammer. But beyond the bravado, ordinary faces, listening intently and betraying perhaps more complex emotions. The words have been heard before, but the President's dress code and the staging smacked, let's face it, of imminent war.
We are ready. We're prepared. And should the United States be compelled to act, our troops will be acting in the finest traditions of America. Should we be forced to act? Should Saddam Hussein seals his fate by refusing to disarm, by ignoring the opinion of the world, you'll be fighting not to conquer anybody, but to liberate people.
From meaty rhetoric to the real thing.
Howard, slice me up a little beef.
The President is cowboy charmer. His style plays as well at home as it tends to entrench stereotypes abroad. On the high seas, the President's New Year's resolution is backed up by gunship diplomacy. This is the Harry S. Truman, a floating fortress only days away from the Persian Gulf. Today, the Pentagon ordered thousands more Marines to the region. The existing force of 60,000 US troops is expected to double by the end of the month. For those who feel a war is necessary, there's only one hitch: the UN weapons inspectors in Iraq. They've already spent 5 weeks looking for Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Their access has been unimpeded, and so far, they seem to have found next to nothing. The rhetoric has been mobilized and the troops are on their way, thousands more every week. But there is one question that still cannot be answered with any certainty. Will there be war, and when? Despite the increasingly robust show of resolve, the doubts linger. Matt Fry, BBC News, at the White House.
Here, detectives investigating the murder of 2 teenage girls at a party in Birmingham have said at least 1 submachine gun was used in the attack. The girls have been named as Charlene Ellis, who was 18, and Letitia Shakespeare, who was 17. The police say they were innocent bystanders and believe they were caught up in a gunfight between rival gangs.
Tonight, at the scene of the New Year shooting, groups of girls tried to comfort each other, aware that friends had been lost in the crossfire of a vicious gang war. This picture was taken at the start of the evening, 4 teenagers dressed to party. But Letitia Shakespeare, aged 17, died shortly after. So did Charlene Ellis. Her friends say she had nothing to do with street violence.
Very quiet, kept herself to herself, never getting nobody's way.
Did she have any connection to a gang culture, to gangs?
She stayed in her house. Most of the time she was in. It was her first time she went clubbing in a year.
The police are still searching the area, but they now know some of the shocking details of what happened. Over 30 shots were fired, 3 weapons used, including a submachine gun.
Overwhelming thoughts are that these girls were completely innocent and have been caught up in either crossfire or were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
No comfort for families like that of Letitia Shakespeare, who lived here. Residents say that local gang members wear guns almost as a fashion accessory, the means to command respect.
If I really wanted a gun, within an hour I could get one. And I'm talking about anything from a shotgun to a semi-automatic to an Uzi, within an hour.
Glenn Reed's son, Corey, was shot dead at a club 2 years ago. He was 28 and had 4 children. She blames a local gang.
My son was shot because he would not join the gang, the Burger Bar gang. He would not join them, and he was killed because of that, because they say if he's not with them, then he's against them.
The Burger Bar boys and the Johnson crew are just 2 of the local gangs. They fight over the drugs trade, have automatic weapons, and the residents live in fear.
We don't want these people in our community. We're not proud of these people in our community. We want to be proud of our black youths.
The police openly admit they can't solve this crime without local help. And people in Aston have been telling us that many of the identities of members of the gangs are known. But they also know the courage it will take to point the finger at those who carry guns and use them. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Birmingham.
The government has confirmed it's considering a minimum 5-year prison sentence for anyone caught carrying an illegal gun. No one knows exactly how many are in circulation, but it's clear that the number is rising sharply. Here's Daniel Sandford.
The awesome firepower of a Mach-10 submachine gun, the type thought to have been used in the Birmingham shooting. It's sometimes called a spray and pray weapon. Not very accurate, but lethal nonetheless. Criminals seem to have little difficulty in getting hold of firearms, whether illegally imported ones or conversions of legal air guns. And as is often the case with the Mach-10, weapons that had been deactivated but have been re-engineered back into a fireable state. Tonight it took me 5 minutes to buy a gun, a perfectly lawful one that police say has become a real problem. So this is what I've just bought. It's a Brocock Magnum. It's actually a kind of air gun, but it's a simple backstreet conversion, which apparently costs less than £100 to turn this into a weapon that fires real bullets. The job involves only everyday machine tools.
They can be converted to lethal barreled weapons with fairly rudimentary engineering skill and ability. But it doesn't make them any less lethal, and we've had a number of offences where this type of weapon has been used and people have died or sustained serious personal injury.
The distributors of the gun say they're working with the Home Office to resolve the problem. Many smuggled weapons come along the same routes as illegal drugs, often through the countries of former Yugoslavia.
And it's a lot to do with the conflicts that there have been in Eastern Europe and sort of military surplus weapons. And the problem there is that a lot of the weapons, rather than being old or sort of rather weak conversions, are actually quite sophisticated military-style weapons that can do an awful lot of damage.
Ministers are considering a minimum 5-year jail sentence for carrying a gun or a replica. But there are those who say that in our inner cities, illegal guns are already out of control. Daniel Sandford, BBC News.
Police believe they've identified one of 2 women whose bodies were found in bin bags in North London. They believe she was 30 years old and from Nottingham. Detectives are still questioning 53-year-old Anthony Hardy, who was arrested last night. A man armed with 2 axes has gone on the rampage at Waltham Abbey in Essex, one of England's finest Norman churches. 2 people were injured in the attack and there's been widespread damage to the Abbey's interior. Our correspondent Daniel Bircher is there. Daniel.
Well, Peter, the damage is still being assessed here tonight. Peace has returned to the Abbey after a day of high drama. There wasn't actually a church service taking place here when this incident happened, but there were members of staff here, members of the public as well. And this is clearly something that has appalled many in the church community. For church volunteers, the heartbreaking task of collecting up the debris. Each piece is being kept and catalogued. There is genuine shock here at the extent of the damage to the historic abbey and also at the way it was done. Caused, say police, by a man wielding 2 hatchets or small axes. A stained glass window and the church organ were wrecked, and behind the altar, the heads of figurines smashed by repeated blows. That, according to the abbey's rector, is the most worrying damage.
In one sense, it seems to be very specific, because he's taken an axe to every compassionate image that's in the church, all the gentle, caring images. It's deeply upsetting, because it seems to be done deliberately.
First information to police came from members of the public in an area about a mile from the Abbey. A report of an assault in a cafe. A 62-year-old man was seriously injured. Next, reports of the man wielding axes in public. It was only then that the church itself was attacked.
The stained glass windows of the church started to be smashed out, and I saw a man wielding an axe smashing through the windows. I ran round to the front door of the church. Just as I did so, 2 police officers arrived.
Forensic teams have been sifting through the pieces. The cost of damage could be up to £200,000. This is a place of worship with a policy of open access. That this could lead to such damage in such frightening circumstances has left many here shaken. Well, there has been an arrest. Police say that arrest involved the use of CS spray, and a local 47-year-old man has been detained. He's still being questioned tonight.
Daniel Bircher at Waltham Abbey. A 3-year-old boy has died after accidentally swallowing the heroin substitute methadone. The child from Lee in Greater Manchester was admitted to hospital in Liverpool after swallowing the drug on New Year's Eve. It's thought he'd taken it from his mother's handbag. The police are continuing their inquiries. The Governor of the Bank of England, Sir Edward George, has given an upbeat assessment of the economy, despite fears that Britain is heading for an economic slowdown. He said interest rates should remain near their current levels and shrugged off figures indicating falling high street sales and more difficulties for manufacturers. Our economics editor, Evan Davis, reports.
A happy new shopping year. It seems like it in High Wycombe today. But will the economy flourish? Today from Sir Edward George, we got an optimistic prognosis. Here's reasons to be cheerful. 1, 2, 3.
A gradual moderation in consumer spending. We think the economy is being supported helpfully by public spending, and we see a gradual pickup in external demand.
Sir Edward is apparently anticipating a prosperous new year. In his view, house prices stabilise, but they don't crash. Consumers keep shopping, but only in moderation. Meanwhile, companies who export succeed in selling more overseas. So is Sir Edward dreaming? Where better to test his forecast than at a store selling beds?
I want this.
This is Dreams in High Wycombe. The shop keeps abreast of the housing market and consumer spending, and here they're just about willing to agree with Sir Edward.
It's certainly not going to be as good as 2002. It's going to be a stable year. I mean, we're very sort of optimistic, we have been in the past, but we've scaled down our targets to a certain extent for 2003.
A soft landing. It may work out like this. There's no obvious catalyst for a crisis, but economies do often lurch from one extreme to another. So it could instead be a bleak new year where house prices crash as people realise they've overpaid for them, consumers feel poorer and stop spending in one sudden jolt, and at the same time, exports stagnate as the world economy slows. For the Bank of England, this scenario would be like a return to the early 90s, after the last house price boom. So, is it a nightmare or is it a dream for 2003? Well, we know that house prices and consumer spending can't exactly go on as they have been. But will they come back down to earth gently or with a big sudden thump? The good folks at the Bank of England here think the economy can land gently, and anyway they can control things if they need to by setting interest rates carefully. But then they are paid to be reassuring. Evan Davis, BBC News at the Bank of England.
The French President Jacques Chirac has attacked the owners of unseaworthy oil tankers, branding them gangsters of the sea, as France struggles to prevent oil slicks polluting some of its finest beaches. Fuel has been pouring out of the Prestige oil tanker, which sank in November off the northwest coast of Spain. High winds have pushed the slick hundreds of miles towards beaches near Bordeaux and further north at La Rochelle.
From hundreds of miles south, the curse of the sunken tanker Prestige brings its unwanted cargo onto French tourist beaches. These small pellets of oil, perhaps a foretaste of worse to come if winds and tides conspire.
I am angry. I am angry because I see the beginning of the pollution, but I don't see the end. Every day, the wave brings always more and more and more pollution.
What hit the Spanish coast before Christmas has now reached France. There is almost hyperactivity from the French authorities.
La France et l'Europe ne laisseront pas.
France and Europe, says the president, can't leave shadowy businessmen and the cowboys of the sea to profit cynically from the lack of controls. Here at the Élysée Palace, Jacques Chirac is masterminding the operation to clean up France's beaches. There's also tough new legislation going through the French Parliament. But for action to really be effective, it needs to be taken on a Europe-wide basis. The Prestige, which split in two last November, now lies in deep water off the Spanish coast. Its toxic load still leaking out, with experts unsure about how much of the 20,000 tonnes of oil remains on board. John Sopel, BBC News, Paris.
Here, the rains may have eased, but hundreds of towns and villages across southern England remain underwater tonight. 98 flood alerts are in force. Among the worst affected areas, Northamptonshire and Bedfordshire, where there are 2 severe flood warnings on the Flit and Great Ouse rivers. The River Nene has burst its banks through much of Northamptonshire, and the Severn around Tewkesbury is dangerously high. Many towns along the Thames, west of London, also remain on alert. But perhaps the wettest place remains Chertsey in Surrey, where the floodwaters rose further today. Robert Hall has spent the past 48 hours there with the increasingly angry residents.
No relief for the people of Surrey tonight, no chance to begin assessing damage to their homes. The water here has hardly moved in 24 hours, and now the questions begin. Could this have been prevented?
We are looking to other people. Right, no, you've got the boss here. So
Questions fielded today by the Environment Agency's chief executive, here to assess the impact of Surrey's worst flooding in recent memory. Around her, fire crews and council staff worked to evacuate those who'd had enough, to protect homes still at risk. Many residents believe excessive building on the Riverbourne floodplain has worsened their plight.
It just seems like the water's going to run somewhere, and the more they're building on the floodplains, it's, we're suffering as a result of it.
Runnymede, the local council, told us they sought advice from the Environment Agency on all proposed floodplain developments. Today, the agency made its view crystal clear.
We're still seeing too many local authorities continuing to build in the floodplain against our advice, with impact later on the properties themselves that are built and indeed on other householders and property owners.
For residents today surveying their sodden homes, this discussion comes too late. Many wonder why they cannot benefit from flood prevention schemes like the £90 million project upstream on the Thames that protect Windsor and Maidenhead. The debate over flood prevention rages on. The priority here is to attempt to clean up, but with river levels still predicted to rise, no one's quite sure when that could begin. Robert Hall, BBC News at Chertsey in Surrey.
And it's not just the UK which is suffering extreme weather. Strong winds, rain and snow have swept across large areas of Germany, killing several people. The River Rhine burst its banks in Cologne. Some parts of the country had up to 2 inches of rain and winds of 150 miles an hour. Israel's leading human rights group is calling for an investigation into the death of an 18-year-old Palestinian man in the West Bank city of Hebron. Palestinians claim the teenager, a civilian, was beaten to death by officers from Israel's border police. The Israeli authorities say they're checking the claim.
Here lies 18-year-old Imran Hamadiya. Beneath the cover, evidence of a beating, his face covered in blood. This old photo, all that remains of the teenager who was still at school. Outside his home in Hebron, relatives mourn. They say Imran was quiet, no history of trouble before he was taken away. His cousin Falah shows me where it happened, here on Imran's own doorstep. He says the border police came and checked everyone's IDs. They said they wanted to talk to Imran, he told us. We saw them pulling him into their jeep. We followed. About 15 minutes later, we found him. The search led here down a nearby road. Falah retraced his steps, not to a frontline area, but to this lonely industrial zone. This is the spot where Imran was discovered. His cousin says he found the body lying here in the middle of the street and checked in vain for a pulse. The area was quiet at the time, no one to see exactly what went on. But Imran's family insists there is only one explanation for all of this. The border police took him and they beat him to death. For Israeli forces, Hebron is a battleground. 11 soldiers killed here lately. Palestinians claim the border police are bent on revenge and prone to brutality. Imran's neighbour told us he was beaten by police just hours before Imran disappeared. They hit me here, Hamza says, and on my legs. When I collapsed, they left and I made it home. Imran did not, buried amid anger and unanswered questions. One more dead Palestinian whose killing may never be investigated. Israel's Justice Ministry told us tonight there was no decision yet on whether or not to open an inquiry. Orla Gearan, BBC News, Hebron.
It used to be the ultimate British status symbol, but today the first Rolls-Royce to be built by its new German owners, BMW, rolled off the production line. Around 1,000 cars will be assembled each year at a new factory in Sussex, though the body and engine will come from Germany. BMW hopes the new model will reverse a long-term decline in Rolls-Royce sales.
It was just the name that BMW bought 4 years ago. Since then, the German firm has built a modern factory in Sussex and employed a new workforce with uniforms you won't see on the average production line. And here's the result, the Rolls-Royce Phantom. Definitely not a glorified BMW, as executives were very keen to emphasise. The former Rolls-Royce boss, brought in to head this project, insists that the old values have been retained.
The whole car design is based on the long tradition of Rolls-Royce coach building. And you can see by the presence of the motor car and the styling of it, it's unmistakably a Rolls-Royce.
Sales of Rolls-Royces have dwindled in recent years. Now the new factory will turn out 1,000 Phantoms a year, with a price tag approaching £250,000. The engineering design teams have done their job. It looks and feels like a Rolls-Royce. Now it's up to the marketing people to prove that they can revive a great British brand. BMW looked back over nearly 100 years of Rolls-Royce production for inspiration and aimed to reproduce the craftsmanship that was second nature at the old Crewe factory. But the engine and body are made in Germany, something that won't be emphasised in the marketing.
The challenge is how do you say this is a real Rolls-Royce and it works properly using German technology without people saying, well, it's not a real Rolls-Royce if it's German because Rolls-Royce is British.
Other luxury car makers, including Bentley, now owned by Volkswagen, will provide stiff competition. The legendary names of British motoring are making a comeback, but under German ownership. Rory Catlin-Jones, BBC News at Goodwood in Sussex.
Now the cricket, and Australia's captain Steve Waugh has equalled Sir Don Bradman's record of 29 Test centuries in the fifth and final Ashes Test. Waugh passed 100 with the very last ball of the day. He returns to the crease shortly with Australia on 237 for 5, 125 runs behind England's first innings total. Michael Peshart is in Sydney.
We are only going into the third day of this Test match, but already there's been as much emotion and action as some entire series. Stephen Waugh, of course, is still there for Australia. England supporters were the first to applaud his century, but they don't want him hanging around today. It's been a match for the experienced men of cricket. Alex Stewart for England proving he still has plenty left to offer. When he went for 71, the fight went out of England's batting. The rest simply folded. But Caddick with the ball was suddenly a serious threat, getting the early breakthrough. Hayden the first to go. Langer might have been out a dozen times before this skier finally landed safely in Hoggard's hands. But the stage was simply set for the main event. Stephen Waugh, under huge pressure to retire, produced an innings no one here will ever forget. His century came off the last ball of the day. He's now scored as many Test hundreds as Sir Donald Bradman. And who's to say there aren't more to come? Michael Peshart, BBC News, Sydney.
And it's just after 10:25. I'll be back later with an update on the day's headlines, but now we join our news teams across the United Kingdom.
Good evening, I'm Geraldine Pears. Swindon's new Great Western Hospital is in crisis tonight. A letter leaked to BBC Radio Swindon says every bed and every trolley is full. Urgent surgery has been cancelled and the hospital has written to local GPs asking them to avoid sending more patients. Steve Nibbs reports.
The Great Western is costing us £18 million a year. It's only been open a month and now this. Every bed and trolley is full. Even before the hospital opened, the NHS was warned that there weren't going to be enough beds.
Despite the fact that more resources are being found and there will be a new unit being built here in a year or two's time, the immediate problem remains. And this is at a time when we've only just started getting into the winter and there isn't a flu epidemic and there isn't any major crisis in terms of the general population's health.
One of the problems being blamed for the crisis is bed blocking. There are over 50 patients here who are ready to leave but have nowhere to go. It means they're using beds that are desperately needed.
There are people in here ready to be discharged. And what we need to do is build out more community services so that those people can be discharged. It's not very healthy to stay in hospital. If you're ready to be discharged, you should, and most people want to be discharged. So that's the end that particularly we need to do more work on.
There's no doubt this is seriously embarrassing for the hospital. Just a month from opening this multi-million-pound facility and operations are having to be cancelled already. However, bosses say the nursing staff are working extremely hard and some beds have now become available late this evening.
Steve Nibbs with that report. A van driver's died after he crashed into a maintenance vehicle on the M4 near Swindon this afternoon. It happened on the hard shoulder of the westbound carriageway between junctions 16 and 17. 2 maintenance workers have been injured, one seriously. The floods have caused another day of misery for homeowners and commuters. In parts of Oxford, the waters have been steadily rising for 4 days. Sejal Karia reports.
David Harris inspects the damage. This is the second time his mother's house in South Hinksey has been flooded in the last 2 years. She's on holiday and still doesn't know.
It'll break her heart, to be honest. It is very upsetting. I know she's going to go through it again, and it affects me as well. I really feel for her on this time, and everybody else in the village as well.
Ready one, sirs, at the far end over there, sir. See the Plasto's coach?
Commuters haven't escaped the effects of the weather either. Flooding on the line at Keddington has led to the suspension of all rail services between Oxford and Didcot, with buses replacing trains. Elsewhere, there were new flood warnings for the River Cherwell in Banbury, where water levels peaked this morning. As the river burst its banks, staff at the neighbouring Spiceball Leisure Centre boarded up and sandbagged the exits. For some drivers, the severity of the flood came as an unpleasant surprise. After days of rain, the next worry is a big freeze. Sejal Karia, BBC South Today.
An Oxfordshire woman whose husband was killed in a crash with a teenager who'd fallen asleep at the wheel is campaigning for the 17-year-old and his brother to be kept in jail. Paul and Martin Folan's original sentence of more than 3 years was reduced to 2 on appeal, but they could now be released after just 9 months. Rachel Hawkes reports.
This is the wreckage of the crash that left David Smith dead and saw 2 teenagers sent to jail for dangerous driving. 17-year-old Paul Folan, seen here on the left in the navy jacket, had only a provisional licence and fell asleep at the wheel. His 19-year-old brother Martin should have been supervising him, but he also fell asleep. They could leave prison later this month.
I'm appalled at it, really. I think they should stay in for the sentence they were originally given. Definitely.
So incensed by the time the 2 will actually spend in prison, Anne Smith started a petition to keep the Folans inside. She now has 700 signatures. Anne's campaign has caught the attention of her local MP, who believes the sentencing in such cases needs a radical overhaul.
If someone is sentenced to a year in prison, they should serve a year in prison. I think that would reassure victims, it reassure the public at large that actually British justice makes sense. It can't make sense to sentence someone to 2 years and find that actually they're only going to be spending 9 months in prison.
Nothing can bring her husband back, but Anne Smith hopes that simply bringing her case to the government's attention may go some way to helping others avoid similar tragedy in future. Rachel Hawkes, BBC South Today.
More than 5,000 Oxford United fans will head to London tomorrow in the hope of witnessing a giant killing. United are taking on cup holders and Premiership leaders Arsenal in the 3rd round of the FA Cup. Here's Jerome Sale.
Arsenal aren't just holders of the FA Cup after beating Chelsea in last year's final. They're also defending league champions and they're attempting to win the European Cup. You'd be forgiven for thinking Oxford haven't got a prayer. But time was when the Gunners fired blanks at the U's. In fact, they've never beaten them in Oxford, and in 1986 lost to them in a game which saw a young Oxfordshire player make an early appearance for Arsenal on his way to international star status.
Oxford got a great result that day, and it was a team full of household names, really. Yeah, it was a big game for me, obviously being a local boy and moving to London, and a lot's happened. I think that was 17 years ago, so a lot's happened since.
Oxford reached the 3rd round of this year's FA Cup with a derby win over Swindon, and though their fans have high hopes for Highbury, the United manager is more realistic.
You're playing against world-class players, and we've got to perform exceptionally well on the day, extend ourselves. Andy Woodman's got to have a worldie, his hands have got to be good, and the big thing is you've got to have luck, and if you have that luck, who knows?
Oxford are long shots to win at Highbury. Most reckon they should just enjoy the chance to rub shoulders with football's elite. That's if they can catch them, of course. Jerome Sale, BBC South Today.
And you can hear live commentary on Radio Oxford. Here's the weather. Tonight, frost and ice forming with snow showers possible. Temperature falling to -2. Tomorrow, sunny spells and snow showers. Top temperature just 3 Celsius. And that's it from me. Now back to Peter Sissons in London.
And the main news tonight, George Bush delivers an uncompromising New Year's message. He tells thousands of American troops, be prepared to liberate Iraq. Here, police say a submachine gun was used in the Birmingham party shootings, which killed 2 teenagers. And a man armed with 2 axes has gone on the rampage at Waltham Abbey in Essex. Newsnight is starting now over on BBC 2, but from the 10 o'clock news. Good night.
Hello. Well, our weather has changed significantly today. If you haven't noticed it yet, you will this weekend, and especially so for the beginning of next week, because it is going to be feeling much colder. In fact, in the forecast, there's snow and there's ice for this weekend, and not just patches of ice, but icy stretches, especially so for tonight in central and southern areas of the United Kingdom. That's because where the rain's been, it's now just freezing, so black ice to watch out for. Also, snow showers for northern and eastern areas will actually settle in places. So all in all, rather hazardous travelling conditions if you're travelling back from the Christmas break. Now, this is where we're likely to see some snow falling during this coming weekend. That doesn't mean it'll settle everywhere. It won't be a blanket covering, but we could see in some southern and eastern areas about 1 to 2 centimetres falling. Now, further north, we have already seen some snow showers. They're settling, and there will be further snow to come. On the highest ground in Glenlivet, there's been around 22 centimetres of snow. Well, you can see those snow showers showing up there in the north and the east. Down to the south, south, we have this band of cloud and rain and sleet, and that's moving away southwards. But it's in the North Sea we're watching this clump of cloud that could come in to give more snow overnight tonight across Lincolnshire and East Anglia. Now tonight it will be a very cold night. Temperatures already below freezing in many places will just drop even lower, down as low as -10 in some sheltered glens in Scotland. And even on the south coast, temperatures getting down to around freezing. So a crisp start to the day on Saturday. Remember that black ice to watch out for, but a good deal of fresh sunshine across many areas. Snow showers down the east coast and perhaps cloudier skies, giving some snow across East Anglia, the East Midlands down into southeast England will gradually head its way westwards, but it should break up, I think, as the day wears on. So for many of us, a fair amount of brightness coming through, but a cold day, temperatures around 1 to 3 degrees. On Saturday night, another widespread harsh frost to come, and then into Sunday, just 1 or 2 snow showers perhaps on the eastern side, but also some dense freezing fog patches to start off the day. For many of us, though, it will be a crisp and sunny day, temperatures getting up to around 3 degrees at the very best. Into Monday, generally staying dry for many of us. Again, some freezing fog patches perhaps across the Midlands and in Scotland. And then as we head through into Tuesday, the winds start to pick up from an easterly direction. That is going to be a raw wind. We call it a lazy one. It'll go through you rather than around you. So do watch out for that. A significant wind chill, particularly on Tuesday. That's it from me for now, though. Bye-bye.
A serial killer hell-bent on revenge.
A man identified as Russ Collier was found and buried alive on Wimbledon Common.
Dangerous.
The killer is meticulous. Everything has a purpose.
Damaged.
He's cut out his heart.
Ruthless.
All your loved ones are at risk.
And anyone who ever told a lie.
Don't you dare make me feel bad because you betrayed my trust.
I didn't. Had better be afraid.
Who's gonna die next? Sam?
No!
This is my fault.
He's in here! Alan Armstrong, Neil Dudgeon, Art Malik, and Ken Scott.
The other could wait a month. They could strike me in the next hour.
Messiah 2, Vengeance is Mine. Starts Saturday, 11th of January on BBC One.
No one is safe.
Now, what are you doing tomorrow?
We are live again with a show that brings you the whole world.
How long are we going to keep this going, Colette? We both need to move on.
Killer left a note first at the second murder scene. Signed the cash a note.
Yeah, that's tomorrow night on BBC One.
Shooting Stars is back!
Rub it all over.
Monday at 9:30 on the BBC Two.
Clint Eastwood saddles up on BBC One as Bronco Billy in an hour after Lenny Henry, on tour and on form.